And welcome back. This is our 68th episode of Thursdays with Charlie. It's the 9th of September, 2021. Well, I hope everybody had a wonderful Labor Day, a whole weekend, and Labor Day on Monday as well. I got to do something a little unusual. I went out for breakfast, and one of our parishioners made breakfast for me, and it was a Southern breakfast. Homemade biscuits, red-eye gravy, grits, and eggs. It was really nice. Red-eye gravy, by the way, is something my aunt in North Carolina, my Aunt Lily, used to make. And it's a gravy, for some reason, made with coffee, as well as, I think, some bacon fat or grease or whatever. But it's really good, and it's really good served with grits. So red-eye gravy. It was a nice Southern breakfast on Labor Day. And if you can notice behind me, there's a beautiful mural now up in our Garces Center. It's something I've wanted for a while. It's really huge. It's 144 inches wide and it's 100 inches high. And it's a mural of the Colorado River. Actually, the Colorado River, not right here in Laughlin, but the mural actually is taken from the Colorado River in Page, Arizona, which is known as Horseshoe Bend of the Colorado River. And so you're seeing an actual photo mural of the Colorado River. It's about 200 miles away from actually being in Laughlin, but it's a beautiful mural and it makes a wonderful backdrop for our Garces room. When you come, if you do, I hope, to the dedication of our Garces Center on the 10th of October, you'll hear more about that this weekend from me. I hope you'll get this chance to stop in and see the mural in person. I really want to thank two of our parishioners, Tom and Miranda Boren, and their friends, Terrence and Mindell Trumbull. They put that mural up for me, and they really did a good job, and I hope you'll all get to enjoy it. I have one quick correction to make on something I said last week, and I was talking about if you have stale bread or stale pound cake, that one of the ways to refresh it is very easily to run it briefly under the faucet and then put it in the microwave for about 15 seconds or so, and it comes back immaculately, really, to a fresh state. One of the parishioners mentioned to me, she said, what would be a better way of doing that and safer would be to run a paper towel under the faucet and then wrap the damp paper towel around the bread or the pound cake and put that in the microwave. That way you don't run the risk of oversaturating the bread. Either way works, and it's a nice little kitchen tip from somebody who doesn't really do much in the kitchen, but I thought I'd pass on to you what I do know. As I mentioned last weekend, Mother Teresa died on September the 5th, 1997. It was within 5 days of Princess Diana dying on August 31st of 1997 as well. Really amazing thing when we think about that being almost a quarter of a century ago. I remember at the time, we all remember Mother Teresa and all the things she did and how active she was for the church. And I remember a joke going around at the time saying, oh gosh, I don't want to ever die on the same day as Mother Teresa. Well, why not? He said, because I'll end up in the line going into heaven behind her. And I'll overhear St. Peter saying to Mother Teresa, but Teresa, you could have done more. And that would make me feel really like, what am I doing here? But Mother Teresa remains a wonderful example for all of us. She's probably one of the greatest fighters of this century, of the past century rather, on the right to life. And she's left us a beautiful series of quotations about respecting life. And I'd like to share some of those as well as some of her other thoughts with you today. These are from Mother Teresa's writings and her various speeches. How can there be too many children? That's like saying there are too many flowers. What a nice way to think of it. I feel that the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion, because it is a war against the child, a direct killing of the innocent child, murder by the mother herself. That puts abortion into a very clear perspective. Mother Teresa continues, and if we can accept that a mother can kill her own child, how can we tell other people not to kill one another? That has an effect in our society, the acceptance of abortion in some areas. Mother Teresa continues, it is a poverty to decide that a child must die so that you may live as you wish. That's really true poverty. Any country that accepts abortion is the poorest of the poor. Mother Teresa continues, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to one another. What a beautiful view on the human race. We belong to one another. A beautiful quote which is attributed to Mother Teresa, but we're not actually sure. We can't find it in the writings, but it's attributed that she said it. Yesterday is gone, tomorrow is not yet come. We have only today. Let us begin. It's a beautiful thought on living for the day, not living in the past, not living in a future that's unknown yet, but living in the day. We have only today. Let us begin. And probably the thing most remembered in Mother Teresa's sayings, in this life we cannot do great things. We can only do small things with great love. Mother Teresa taught us to put great love into everything we do, even the small things. We remember Mother Teresa 24 years ago last weekend. Mother Teresa entered her eternal reward. Now coming up on this weekend, in just another 2 days, is the 20th anniversary of 9/11/01. The events of 9/11 are really powerful in the way they changed our whole American worldview. 9/11/01 dawned as a beautiful Tuesday in New Jersey, where I was living at the time, in a small parish in northern New Jersey, Immaculate Conception in Norwood, New Jersey. My mom was staying with me. She was still alive at the time and was spending a couple of weeks with me in the rectory. And I had just gone over to the church and said the 8 o'clock Mass in the morning, and I had talked to a few people after Mass, and then I walked back from the church to the rectory, and my secretary, Pat, said to me, she said, I just heard on the radio a plane crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. And so I figured, well, it's probably a small Cessna or something. A pilot got distracted. It's probably a really sad scene, but it's probably just a two-seater or a four-seater plane. I remember the World Trade Center very, very well. I had a little connection with it. One of the weddings that I did in Norwood, in my parish in Norwood, was for a couple who had their wedding reception in the World Trade Center at a restaurant called Windows on the World. It was an absolutely beautiful restaurant. And one of the people that was a guest, as well as I was, at their wedding reception was one of the contestants for the Miss Universe pageant that year. And the contestant was Miss Columbia in the Miss Universe pageant. And at the wedding reception, I got to dance with her. And so I can actually say I danced with one of the contestants for Miss Universe. And I did not step on her feet. We had a really good time. And I remember the couple very well. There was a really nice young couple from my parish, and I had gotten to know them for more than a year before the wedding. And every Sunday we used to joke about it and talk about getting, oh, the wedding is coming, the wedding is coming. And one Sunday, the groom, prospective groom, said to me, he said, I'm going to have to watch what I eat. My wife-to-be says I'm putting on too much weight. I said, oh, well, she'll pick on you for that. And when she was standing there, I looked at her and I said, oh, so you don't want a fat groom. And she looked at me and she said, and I don't want a tubby priest either at my wedding. And the groom just looked at me and laughed and said, well, we'll both have to do our best to knock off some pounds. The World Trade Center attack on 9/11/01 is a pivotal event in our history. In fact, many people kind of date things from that. And it's one of those events where people of a certain age remember exactly where you were and what you were doing when the news came. People of an older age remember November 22nd, 1963, when President Kennedy was assassinated. I remember being in a sophomore classroom, Latin. It was my Latin class with Mr. John Ruse as my teacher. And the vice principal walked into the room and told us, room 215, St. Joseph Regional High School, there I was. And I remember the moment I heard of President Kennedy being assassinated. I presume many other people of my age or older can remember that event just as clearly. For people a little bit younger, 1986, January 28th, the crash of the Challenger when it exploded in front of millions of people watching it on TV. Most people remember exactly where they were when they heard that news, what they were doing, and who they were with when that event occurred. Same with September 11th, 2001. Most people of a certain age remember that so very, very clearly, where they were and what they were. I remember when the Challenger crashed in 1986, I was standing in the business office of St. Joseph Regional High School. I was just talking to the secretary, and she had a little TV on, and she was watching it, and she said, "Oh my gosh," and walked around her desk so that I could see the results of it as well. September 11th, 2001, as I mentioned, I had just come back from Mass. Now, the 4 planes that were involved that we know of, American Airlines Flight 11 was a Boeing 767. It had 92 people on board, and it departed from Boston Airport at 7:59 a.m., headed for Los Angeles, a full load of fuel. In fact, all 4 planes involved had full loads of fuel for transcontinental flights. It was hijacked soon after takeoff, and it was deliberately crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center at about the 90th floor at 8:46 a.m. That was the news report my secretary heard about a plane crashing into the World Trade Center. No one expected it to have been a 767 crashing in, such a large plane. The North Tower, with windows on the world, the restaurant I had been in, collapsed at 10:28 a.m. very, very quickly. The next flight was United Airlines Flight 175, also a Boeing 767. With 65 people on board, it departed also from Boston at 8:14 a.m. and it was headed for Los Angeles, again a full load of fuel. It was hijacked soon after takeoff, and it was deliberately crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center at about the 85th floor. And that crash occurred at 9:03 a.m. It was almost as if it were planned so that people would be watching the events of the first plane crashing, and many of us got to see that second plane circle and go into the South Tower. The South Tower collapsed at 9:59 a.m., much quicker than the North Tower collapsed. Then there was American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757, with 64 people on board, departed from Washington Dulles Airport at 8:20 a.m. He had carefully coordinated these flights to hijack and take off at a similar time so that nobody would be prepared and warned to not fly at that point. It was headed for Los Angeles, again with a full load of fuel. Hijacked soon after takeoff, it was deliberately crashed into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. on that beautiful Tuesday morning. Then there's United Airlines Flight 93, a Boeing 757 with 44 people on board, that departed from Newark Airport in New Jersey at 8:41 a.m., just before the first plane was crashed into the tower. It was headed for San Francisco. It was had a full load of fuel. It was hijacked soon after takeoff over Pennsylvania. Now, the story is, and they even made a movie about it, that several of the passengers decided that they were going to overtake the hijackers. And there was a fight that ensued, and in the course of it, that plane crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It's believed that that plane was intended to be crashed into the White House or the Capitol building, but the bravery of the passengers on Flight 93 averted that. They did lose their lives on a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Now, while all of this is happening, at 9:31 a.m., right after the first two planes hit the World Trade Center towers, speaking from Florida, President George Bush was already on the news, and he announced that New York City had an apparent terrorist attack. 9:31 a.m. That's very shortly after the first attacks. At 9:42 a.m., for the first time in American history, the FAA grounded all flights. Immediately, they were told to land at the nearest airport. That brought down over 3,300 flights, commercial flights, and over 1,200 private airplane flights were immediately grounded and within the next hour landed at airports. First time the FAA had ever done that. They feared that there might be other hijackers on board other flights and that this could be an out-and-out attack. We don't know whether there were other hijackers on the other flights. We do think that this action by the FAA probably saved many, many lives. There's a story, I don't know it's true, that the man at the FAA control center who actually ordered the grounding of the flights immediately was on his first day of work in that position. I've never been able to trace that down. Is that true or not? But can you imagine making such a momentous decision on your very first day of work? At 11 a.m. in the morning, after the two towers had crashed, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani in New York ordered the evacuation of Lower Manhattan. That meant more than 1 million residents, lots of workers, and people who were in the city, even temporarily, had to evacuate that area completely. It was felt that there might be other attacks coming, and who knows what damage they could have brought. At 8:30 p.m., within 12 hours of the initial plane hitting the World Trade Center tower, President Bush spoke from Florida, and he declared that we and our allies would win this fight against terrorism. It was an amazing time in our American history, and there were very brave people on the planes, in the buildings. The stories of some of the rescues in the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon were amazing. The bravery on Flight 93. Plus, very brave leaders at the time, President Bush and Mayor Giuliani, did wondrous work at that time for our great country. I want to share just some of my impressions of 9/11/01. I was actively involved. I was a military chaplain still on the reserves for the United States Air Force. So when I noticed the planes crashing into the tower on the TV, I suspected that pretty soon something's going to happen, and I was right. The Air Force notified me by phone at 10 o'clock that morning. 10 o'clock, right after the two planes had hit the World Trade Center towers, that I was on alert. At noon, the Air Force called again and said I had to report to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware by 6 p.m. that evening. That's an almost 4-hour drive from where I was in New Jersey. So hearing that at noon, I would have to leave New Jersey by 2 o'clock, in Norwood, New Jersey, by 2 o'clock, in order to make that deadline. That meant doing a lot of things in 2 hours. Well, and first of all, I was the only priest in the parish. The parish had been run for many years by the Carmelites, and so I called the Carmelite order, and the priest who had been there last, just before I came to take over, Father Jerry Heinen, was in retirement. And I said, Jerry, can you take the parish? He said, for how long? I don't know. I honestly don't know. And so within a couple of hours, Jerry managed to get his things together and come back to the parish he had left a few years ago for me to take over. Then I had to take care of my mother. My mother was still capable of living on her own with help, and so my secretary brought her home to Montvale and promised to watch over her, watch out for her while I'll be gone. I didn't know how long I would be gone. We were expecting that this was an all-out attack on America. And I did make it down to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware just prior to 6 p.m. on that evening of the 11th of September 2001. To this day, I can remember driving down the New Jersey Turnpike and seeing the smoldering results, the remains of both World Trade Center towers. Did not know what we were getting into. Got on the base through much security, because again, they were afraid this was an all-but-out attack on our country. My first assignment was I was going to be the senior reserve chaplain there. They had brought in many chaplains from different denominations. Again, they were not knowing what to expect. At that time, they were still expecting that we would get mass casualties from the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon. And so one of our first assignments was 12-hour shifts at the mortuary. Dover Air Force Base has the mortuary for overseas in Europe and Africa and Middle East, as well as for the continental United States east of the Mississippi. And so we put in the hours. Some of the chaplains took to that very well. I happened to be one that took to those shifts very well. It was an honor to be present with these mortuary workers. As it turned out, we did not get remains from the World Trade Center towers. Most of them were disintegrated. We did get a lot of remains from the Pentagon that were helicoptered in. I remember one reserve chaplain, after a few days, he just couldn't handle the 12-hour shifts in the mortuary. It was very different from parish or school work, being there for the dead bodies being taken care of by the staff over there, being there for the staff as well to give them strength and support. And I got called from the main chapel. One of the mortuary workers said, Chaplain, you need to come over here, and mentioned the chaplain's name who was there. And I went over, and he was sitting out in the lobby, and he just looked at me and he said, I'm not going in there again. And I said, okay, we'll get you back to the chapel. You can do the work at the chapel. We'll get you there, and we'll cover your shift, and don't worry, we'll be all right there. And it was good. It was a beautiful, very powerful sense of duty. One of the groups I worked with when I was there at the mortuary was EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Because again, we were getting remains in body bags from the plane that hit the Pentagon. We didn't know if some of these remains were the terrorists, or some of these remains might contain bombs or explosives. We just did not know what we were going to be getting. And we were behind a little 10-inch concrete wall, hoping that we would not get blown up if we hit something wrong. Everything had to go through a conveyor belt and through an X-ray machine. And I remember the motto of EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Their motto was initial success or complete failure. We always thought that something could happen. Fortunately, nothing ever did. Now, I mentioned that security was really tight on the base, and it really was. And one of the things we had to arrange for is people coming on and off the base for normal business, not for necessarily connected with the attack, but the chapels were on base, the exchange, the commissary. There were thousands of people who used Dover Air Force Base. And so they tried to come up with different systems, ID cards, color-coded cards, numbers, things like that. We tried to do it. And my senior chaplain the active duty side, spoke about it one Sunday at Mass several times. And I know this for a fact because when I went to the staff meeting on Monday, the base commander was there and he was talking about it. And so when I got back to the chapel, the senior chaplain said to me, he said, well, was anything interesting mentioned at staff meeting? I said, yes. I said, the commander doesn't want us to talk about the problems at the gate anymore. He will solve it, but don't talk about the protocols for getting on and off the base. And he said, well, what exactly did he say? I said, do you really want to know, sir? And he said, yes. I said, the commander said he would rip your lips off if you said anything about it again. He just looked at me. I said, that's an exact quote. But the care taken by the staff was really, really amazing. And we would get helicopter flights coming in at all hours of the day and night. And the USO would be there providing for the honor guard, and the head of the chaplains or whoever chaplain was on duty would be there. There would be the senior service member, whether they'd be an Army or Navy or Marines or Air Force going in, and would be there. And we get called out 2, 3 in the morning perhaps because the helicopter flight was coming in. One time, no one from the senior service showed up. Only the chaplain, me, and the honor guard showed up. And one of the enlisted men in the honor guard said, that's okay, chaplain. We have all we need. The honor guard is here. The chaplain is here. We don't need the senior staff. It was kind of nice. They took their position very, very seriously. And one night we had a thunderstorm, and it was thundering and lightning, and there was a helicopter with remains trying to get in to land at Dover Air Force Base. And it was about 2 in the morning. And the senior general who was there at that time just looked at me and said, chaplain, make it stop raining. And I looked at him and I said, sir, I'd waited for years to use this line, by the way. I said, sir, I'm in sales, not management. And he smiled and we went on, and fortunately the storm eased up a little bit. One of the most poignant things over there that we found, was we were going through the belongings that came through with the remains, was a wedding ring. And the wedding ring had an inscription on it in Latin. And so the EOD staff, when they found the wedding ring, they brought it over to me and they said, chaplain, do you know what this says? And I looked at the Latin. It was Amor Aeternus Est. Amor Aeternus Est. And I looked at it and I was able to translate. I said, love is eternal. And it was one of those wedding rings that looked like it was part of a pair, that there was someone somewhere else wearing the opposite ring, holding the other ring. And we had one of the rings from the person who was killed at the Pentagon. We thought about that and we offered a prayer. No one will ever forget the events of 9/11/01, and we shouldn't forget them. To keep them in mind for us, everybody should receive a letter from us on our mailing list of an image of the World Trade Center that we had done for here. We own the copyright to this, and so it's our image of the World Trade Center. We should not forget. I also enclosed in the mailing that you're going to get this week a quote about America by Archbishop Fulton Sheen, one of my favorite writers. Look forward to seeing you over the week, and certainly in all our prayers we'll remember the lives that were lost, the lives that were changed because of 9/11/01 as we celebrate the 20th anniversary with remembrance and with prayer. It's time for Pascal to come in and join us. He joins us from the side today, and I think that quote from the wedding ring is appropriate for all of us. Amor Aeternus Est. Love is eternal. That's true, that's beautiful, that's powerful. God bless you, and thanks for joining us.